Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments. Today we will be talking about timber as a vernacular building material. So following upon our discussion on stone as a vernacular building material, I have introduced you to one of the important work of Brunskill's work on Illustrated Handbook of Vernacular Architecture, which he discussed about different material techniques as well as the walling elements, the roofing elements, and how to study vernacular architecture, how to document a building. So all these, and especially in the focus of the English heritage, which he talked about. So with this understanding and my personal living experiences in the Great Britain, and as well as my living experiences in Sweden and part of my various visits to Finland, Switzerland, and many other parts of European countries. So I tried to bring a kind of small summary of the timber constructions, especially how they carry particular traditions and how it is a traditional building reserves. So if you classify the timber constructions, mainly you will find kind of three sets of constructions. One is a horizontal log type construction. So which is the second one, we see the post and plank construction, and the third one, the timber frame constructions. So if you see on the right hand side, this is actually a photograph when I visited Levi. In fact, this is a small cottage house where we stayed, and this whole house is built with the wooden logs, so the tree trunks, because being a cold climate, we are talking about a temperature of -30 to -40 in the harsh winters. So obviously timber it's one of the best materials, especially in the cold climates. In winter it makes you warm, and in summer it makes you cool. So you can see that all these the logs have been laid in a horizontal, and then they have been interlocked at the junctions, and that is how the whole house is made. Timber being an abundant resource in the Scandinavian countries, so obviously the way they grow, the way they protect their forests is completely unmatchable with the kind of Indian context. So that is how these particular countries, even though timber, of course, the afforestation and deforestation is quite manageable, and they do have a control of these resources, especially the forest stewardship councils in UK, and which have a supply chain management processes as well. So I will also introduce to some other places where I was in Zakopane in Poland, and you can see the whole setting is the whole village setting, and the whole town setting is completely built with the timber frames. And here you can see the post and the shingles onto the facade, and the historic churches, and the whole context itself, it's matched with the kind of landscape setting. And one of the important aspect is in some part of the geographies, like for example in Essex, where the termite aspect is also crucial, and obviously certain specifics of timber grades are used there. And this is again back in England. This is actually the Shakespeare's house, his dwelling, where he lived. And what you see is a kind of post and plank construction techniques. So here you can see these are the vertical posts, and you have these planks, and they're huge, and that adds to the English heritage. And so this is in Stratford-upon-Avon. So similarly, in the heart of London, you see, if you go to the Oxford Street, and that's where you see the Liberty Mart, where the whole building is of this timber constructions, and it is how they have renovated it, and how still it is have requalified these old houses for the new uses. This is one of the best examples. So when we talk about these timber houses, one of the important constructions which we need to discuss here is crack frame buildings. Especially they are very popular in Leicester Square. I am giving you a small document link here, so you can actually download this, and this will be very useful, especially it deals with the whole crack frame buildings, especially in the Leicestershire. So basically in this crack frame, this is a kind of A-shaped frames assembled on the ground. Basically they are assembled here, and then they lifted like this, and then they are tied up with these tie beams, the collar beams, and that is how, you know, they set up this kind of, they call as barge boards, and as well as the wall plates. So this whole skeleton is much grandeur in nature, and they're all basically laid on the ground, and they lift it and they fix it to the ground here, right? So one basic thing you have to see, the A-frames were assembled on the ground, then reared one by one into a vertical position. So the ridge purlins, the side purlins and wall plates could be dropped into their sockets and tie frames together. So basically when you raise it, and the tie actually binds together, so there's a little tension created on it, and basically the load actually distributes from these inclined members. So how they join the detail of a crack construction? So what they do is, normally in the traditional methods, so they take a huge bark of a tree and sometimes cut into the half and exactly reverse it. So basically it actually overlaps in a different direction, and sometimes it matches, and sometimes they have to bring another pieces into it. So that is how through a trial and error process. And what you can see here is a kind of lap joint, and so how it fixes onto the top. So here you can see that once they are laid and then bring up, and at the same time this is how, and this particular space, which they referred as a kind of base. So this is in between these two posts, and then that's referred as a bay. And in fact what you see in this diagram is with two closed and open truss. So you can see here there's a two closed, and the third one is an open truss. And similarly, if you see the bottom right on here, you can see how the corner and how the crack blade and the wall post rising from a timber sill and stone plinth. So basically you have the stone plinth which is leveled, and then again you have a corner like this, it sits onto the lap joint, and then the post comes, and then from it again the crack starts moving on to the other direction. So in the box type constructions, what you see here is the box type box frames. Here you can see the kind of two bays, right, and in length, and wall plates are connected in tie beams, and you have these cross bracings which actually holds these kind of frames, which is very common. This particular technique you can even find in Mediterranean countries. I was in Cyprus, and even there I could able to find some of these constructions, and how the intermediate things are filled with a kind of insulation materials. So here you can see how a corner rising, the similar technique what you see here and what you see here, and then how this is supported on either sides, and then how it frames a frame. Then we come to what are the alternative methods of, because each it's just not a box we are building for a dwelling, but it's so each place has its own character based on its resources available and based on its historical features, or because it also adds on to the heritage of it. So one of the construction which I would like to bring to you is the wattle and daub infill method. So in fact here you can see that you have the vertical studs and the horizontal rails. So you can see there is vertical studs here. So how it fixes in the top and how it fixes in the bottom, and then that gives a kind of framing. And then these wattles go like this, one over the another. So what you can see here is like this, inside to outside, outside to inside, and that's actually again you fill with a kind of daub. So this is one of the technique, and this is very frequently you can observe in basically in Hereford and Shropshire, and many local variations in the way they view, in the way the size of the panels they are using. So another one, this is a very quite common technique in, especially with the tiles, as the handmade tiles. So you can see that the same frames, you have a small battens going on the horizontal directions, and these handmade, so what you see here is the overlapping of the handmade tiles. So basically the tiles are hung on laths or a small battens which are going, so that to give a triple lap, you can see here 1, 2 and 3. So there's a triple lap, each tile covering 2 others. So basically every tile is covering 2 other tiles, where members of the heavy frame were far apart intermediate studs or needed to help carry the laths. So basically they have a particular distances, and then especially near the window you can see the details of it, and what you can see is the reality of how even the walling material is completely cladded with tiles. Now coming to, we just discussed about the handmade cladding, but now if you go for the mechanical cladding, or in other words we also refer as like a mathematical cladding, tile cladding. So here one important aspect is, in fact there are many companies, I am just giving a website of one of the company which actually do the mathematical tiles. In fact these could be done in a kind of desired formats, as well as, for example, if you take the corners, so how a tile could be made in a desired format, and it also gives a kind of brick like face structure, it gives a kind of brick like face skin, and these tiles were normally hung or nailed to laths spanning between the frames and studs. So narrow tiles are used at the closures because at the edge, and similarly you have timber covered strips were used to conceal joints. So here you can see you have the vertical member, so where if you want to cover the joints, because on one side you are keeping the tile, and then you get a very abrupt, so then they cover with a kind of timber cover strips, so or any other material. So that is one of the technique in the cladding. And whereas the weatherboard cladding is also used. In fact, in these weatherboard techniques, the similar kind of cladding, what you use is kind of any advanced materials, because these things are also quite common from 17th, 18th centuries also. And but nowadays, if you look at it in the modern construction, they are using some kind of polypropylene sheets or anything for this cladding. And here again you have these battens, and they are basically of a single lap. You can see here a single lap, and just covered one below like this, sorry. And this is again a butt joint. There is a butt joint and a lap joint, and whereas here there are again a parallel faced, it's a little lap over here, and what you see here is a kind of as a butt with beaded edge, so basically a little beading over there, and again here lapped boards. So what they do is, so the section is something like this, which is quite common. This is quite common, and so how this recession over it, and then how it again, so these are all for good aesthetic purposes. So this is one, what you can see here is a kind of using the weatherboards as a cladding, and which could be also the backup to it is a kind of insulation material which we fill into it. So rather than a brick wall on the facade, what we use is a weatherboard claddings. And this is another plaster or pargetting as cladding. So this is quite famous, especially in the Suffolk area, which you see quite often. So what they do is they have these laths made very closely, right, spaced to the studs, basically maybe this much, maybe about 5 centimeter or something, 50 mm I can say. So and then they keep the laths or the battens onto it, and then they are also closely spaced to the studs and any necessary intermediate members, because if it is continuous then they might make an intermediate vertical members also if needed. And frame plaster in 2 coats was then applied to the outside. So it might be a stucco, it might be a lime plaster, or a particular compositions which they can use. At least 2 coats they use for the outside, and there would be a separate lath and plaster interior lining. So basically what you see is these plasters, and see here again this whole set, what you can see is a kind of decorative element, and it is also referred as a kind of freehand pargetting. So here you need to have certain kind of picture of what kind of imagination you are going to create onto the facade of it, and at the same time it should not create a very high bumps or lows. So it has to be a little carefully done, especially in this, because especially the details which you have to see is the kind of edges, how they plaster it. At the same time one has to look at it, how the operational aspect of these windows, and there are different patterns. One can look at the zigzag patterns of it, and there's a cable molded or combed pattern of it, and there is a fan combed pattern, like you have the fan combed pattern, and you have the molded pargetting debased medieval patterns, which is of a kind of medieval times, as well as you have the molded panel pargetting. So like that, a variety of some of the motif, it could be a Corinthians or any other natural elements you can bring into it. So it brings a kind of aesthetical. That is where this particular technique is very relevant, especially when we are dealing with the culturally responsive built environments. And when you are dealing with these kind of old buildings, especially for any kind of renovations, or if you are dominating with any kind of new intrusions in the context of these buildings, obviously certain care has to be taken from the urban design perspective as well. And I think there are many more techniques, but I would like to just for this lecture, I'd like to brief about a kind of brick nogging technique. This is one of the last I'm going to discuss here. And here what the same thing, you have the frame here, and in between sometimes even in the trusses as well, you can make it as a kind of different compartments, and you knock the brick, and the different ways how one can infill these particular panels. So some of the techniques you can see is brick on edge was used with lighter timber sections, and as well as here if you see the kind of compartments they can do here is date picked out in the colored bricks. So basically, so they also worked out, like I can show you a good example here. The one of the, I got this a very beautiful photograph from Andrea Kirkby in a Flickr. So one can see that, so these compartments have been, or the structural members, and then you can see how the different proportions of the bricks are aligned in a different fashion, and you can do I mean extensive decoration with it with a simple material, brick. So what we learn in the bonding techniques in the beginning of our architecture or the building construction classes is basically we know about the English bond, a Flemish bond. You have the English bond with one header, one footer, and you have the Flemish bond with alternative header and footer. So in that way we did learn about this, but you know how this timber could be a kind of supportive material along with the brick walling systems. You know, so in that way it could be aesthetically experimented, and what you can see here is a kind of timber, and you see the lintel up here, and even in between you can see the filling material, the nogging, the bricks have been knocked in, and in various fashions. On one side you have, so this is also creating a kind of, it's not continuous, but you see they're breaking a kind of, but whereas you see here it's inclined, but then it's in a continuous pattern. So with this, what we understood is just with the timber, especially in the countries like England or in Sweden or in Finland or any other European countries, even in Canada, countries like Canada or even America, especially timber is one of the biggest reserves for building activities. Not only now, historically it has been used as a basic building material. So one of the demerits in the present context is especially with the fire. So how we can protect these timber buildings, especially in the event of fire, because during the fire the timber is much more prone, and that is where the building codes, that is where the building codes will help us to how we can actually plan the building and how we can orient it, how we can compartmentalize the buildings, and at the same time how we can provide insulation materials and how we can provide the fire, what kind of fire stoppage we can do, So all these things, these are some advancements, and in the next class what I'll also deal with it is now as a timber as a vernacular building resource, which we discussed, but then with various examples, mostly we discussed in the English side of it, and we also did discussed about various techniques like cladding, wattle and daub cladding, and the cruck construction, which is more important aspect in the timber buildings. And we also did discussed about the clay tile cladding, and we also discussed about the mathematical tile cladding, and which is also referred as the mechanical tile cladding, and we also discussed about the weatherboard cladding. So in this way we did discuss, and the next class we'll also look into how the advanced systems also work. A small brief about that, we'll also discuss about that. Thank you very much.